There is a photograph circulating right now that almost nobody in the Western press has properly unpacked. It shows a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, sitting in the warm water of the Gulf of Oman, roughly 200 kilometers south of Iran. It is parked there deliberately. Not inside the Strait of Hormuz, where Iranian missile batteries could reach it in under 4 minutes, but just outside, in a position that says something very specific about how Washington intends to fight this war. Because the story the networks are telling you tonight, that President Trump has ordered a naval blockade to stop Iran building a nuclear weapon, is only half the story. The other half, the half I want to walk through, is that this blockade is not really about uranium. It is about whether a superpower in 2026 can still strangle a country economically without actually invading it. And the answer to that question is going to shape the next 10 years of American foreign policy. Let us start with the thing hiding in plain sight. CENTCOM confirmed on April 13th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time that a blockade of every Iranian port on the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman is now in effect. That is not a rumor. That is an official proclamation published on the Central Command feed with a notice to mariners broadcast going out on Bridge to Bridge Channel 16. But read the statement carefully. The blockade applies to ships going to and from Iranian ports. It does not apply to ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz to non-Iranian destinations. That is a massive climb down from what Trump posted on Truth Social the night before, where he said the Navy would block any and all ships entering or leaving the strait. Somewhere between that post and the CENTCOM proclamation, the lawyers and the admirals got involved. Here is why that matters. A total closure of Hormuz would bottle up roughly 1/5 of the global oil and LNG trade. A selective blockade of Iranian ports only affects Iranian oil. Same ocean, completely different economic blast radius. The Pentagon knows this. That is why the Abraham Lincoln is where it is. And that is why a second defense official told the Associated Press on Monday that no American warship is actually inside the Persian Gulf itself. The position is the doctrine. Stand off at range. Use the carrier's F-35Cs and Super Hornets for interdiction from deep water. Let destroyers like the USS Frank E. Peterson and the USS Michael Murphy do the contested runs through the strait. Both of those ships already transited it on April 11th, the first American warships to do so since the war began on February 28th. The United States is telling Iran, we can reach in whenever we want, but we are not going to hand you the close-range fight you have been preparing for. So, what is actually sitting in theater? 16 American warships across the CENTCOM area of responsibility, according to a defense official briefing reporters on Monday. 2 aircraft carriers, the Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, each with its strike group. A Marine Expeditionary Unit on the USS Tripoli with roughly 2,200 Marines aboard. A second MEU and a third carrier strike group reportedly on the way. Add to that the air side. At least 14 American refueling tankers, KC-135s, and the newer KC-46 Pegasus airframes have been reported at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel since early 2026. Those tankers are the quiet part of the story. You do not launch a sustained air campaign against Iran without them, because the flight distances from the Gulf to Iranian nuclear sites like Fordo and Natanz demand mid-air refueling. The tankers being visible on the tarmac is the message. Then there is the buildup that started back in January. According to reporting compiled on the 2026 buildup, 12 F-22 Raptors were deployed to Avda Air Base in southern Israel on February 24th. The first time offensive American fighter assets were openly stationed there. F-15E Strike Eagles moved from RAF Lakenheath in the UK to Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. Royal Air Force Typhoons are sitting at Al Udeid in Qatar as part of the Allied Shield. This is the largest American air and naval concentration in the Middle East since 5 carrier battle groups gathered at the start of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. Let that sink in. Whatever you want to call this, blockade, interdiction, coercion, the force posture is at the scale of an invasion, and that is precisely what I think Trump is trying to avoid actually doing. The trigger for all of this was the collapse of the Islamabad talks over the weekend of April 11th and 12th. These were not minor meetings. They were the most substantive direct engagement between Washington and Tehran since the 1979 revolution. The American delegation was led by Vice President J.D. Vance and Jared Kushner alongside him. The Iranian side was Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Ali Bagheri. Pakistan mediated. The talks died on one sentence. Iran refused to give up what it calls its right to a civilian nuclear program. Vance told reporters before leaving that Washington had made its final and best offer. Trump, posting from his resort in Miami on Sunday, said there was simply no version of a deal where an unpredictable regime walks away with enrichment capability. Now here is where I push back on the common framing. A lot of coverage is painting this as Iran being unreasonable. That is lazy. Iran has watched what happened to Libya after Gaddafi surrendered his program in 2003. It has watched what happened to Ukraine after it gave up its Soviet-era warheads in 1994. The regime in Tehran reads the same history books we do, asking them to fully dismantle enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief, while American carriers sit off their coast, is asking them to trust a promise that has a very poor historical track record. That does not mean Iran is right. It means the negotiation was always going to be harder than Washington's press team let on. The 2-week ceasefire agreed on April 7th was always a pressure window, not a peace. And now, that window is closing. The fighting since February 28th has killed at least 3,000 people in Iran, 2,089 in Lebanon, 23 in Israel, and more than a dozen in the Gulf states. 13 American service members are dead. Any script that treats those numbers casually is not worth your time. I want to pause here, because a lot of you have been writing in the comments on the last 3 videos with the same objection. You are saying, this is just another forever war dressed up in new language, and I take that seriously, because on the surface, you are right. 16 warships, 2 carriers, F-22s in Israel. That is the choreography of every Middle East intervention you have watched for 20 years. But there is one thing that is genuinely different this time, and it is the thing the coverage keeps missing. Trump is not trying to occupy Iran. He said it directly on Fox News on Sunday. He does not want prolonged military conflict. What he is testing is whether a blockade, combined with targeted strikes on specific infrastructure like desalination plants and power generation, can produce regime behavior change without boots on the ground. It is the Iraq lesson, applied in reverse. That is why I am not calling this a war of choice in the Bush sense. I am calling it a war of attrition by economics. Oil is already up roughly 50% since February 28th. Iranian crude is being bottled up, while Iran's own revenue from Hormuz tolls, yes, Iran has been charging ships to pass Larak Island, gets cut off. The target is the budget, not the country. Whether that works is a completely open question, and I will tell you at the end what I think happens next. Now, the Iranian side. Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Bagheri framed the American move as a revenge of choice targeting the global economy, meaning Tehran wants the world to see this as an attack on everyone's supply chain, not just Iran's. That is a deliberate message aimed at China, India, and the European buyers who actually move Iranian barrels. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps went harder. Their statement on Monday declared that the Strait of Hormuz is under full Iranian control and that any military vessel approaching will be trapped in what they called a deadly vortex. Iran's Navy chief, Rear Admiral Shahram Irani, called the American threats ridiculous on state television. Defense Ministry spokesman Reza Tlaib said the strait will forever remain under Iranian and regional control. Here is the part most coverage glosses over. It is not clear who in Tehran actually has operational command of the IRGC Navy in Hormuz right now. Nicole Grajewski at Sciences Po pointed this out over the weekend. The IRGC reports directly to the supreme leader, not the regular Iranian armed forces. That means any incident at sea, a small boat swarm, a mine drift, a drone strike on a tanker, could escalate without Tehran's civilian leadership even greenlighting it. That is the real danger of the current posture, not a planned war, an unplanned one. And remember, Iran has already demonstrated asymmetric capability. On February 3rd, an F-35C from the Abraham Lincoln shot down a Shahed 139 drone approaching the carrier in the Arabian Sea. The IRGC attempted to board a U.S. flag tanker, the MV Stena Imperative, the same day. These incidents did not escalate. The next one might. The numbers on the water tell you how tight this has already become. Lloyd's List Intelligence tracked 6 transits through Hormuz on Wednesday last week and 8 on Thursday. The week of March 30th to April 5th saw 76 transits, the busiest since the conflict started. That is still under 10% of normal daily traffic. Somewhere between 500 and 700 vessels, over 10,000 deadweight tons, are currently stuck inside the Persian Gulf. Iran confirmed on Thursday that it had laid mines in the strait, the first time Tehran had openly admitted to it, and designated 2 transit corridors, one of which requires ships to sail past Larak Island and contact the IRGC for documentation, and in some cases, payment. That is the Tehran toll booth. The American blockade is, among other things, designed to shut that toll booth down. So here is my call, and you can hold me to it. I do not think this blockade survives past the end of April without one of 2 things happening. Either there is a limited kinetic incident in the Gulf, a mine strike, a small boat engagement, a tanker taken, that forces Washington to escalate and finally go after Iranian port infrastructure directly. Or the Chinese quietly broker a face-saving off-ramp in Muscat that lets Tehran keep a symbolic enrichment program in exchange for full Hormuz reopening. What I do not think happens is a full American ground invasion. That era is over, and Trump knows it. This is the first major test of whether economic strangulation can replace regime change as the default tool of American power. If it works, every future Washington confrontation with North Korea, with Venezuela, with whoever is next, looks like this. That is why this week matters, far beyond the Gulf.